Out of Overwatch's original cast members, Junkrat's kit is one that feels the most like a remnant from when Overwatch was planned to be a PvE game. It's not like his kit doesn't work or even flow, but it does feel a bit outdated in a game with more emphasis on dueling over spamming chokes or PvE wave clear. Due to this, he's historically been rated as one of the worst DPS in the game, despite his one-tricks turning his opponents into dust in no time flat, and has had a surprisingly high amount of success at the professional level. Junkrat himself is an explosives-crazed agent of mayhem, and his kit plays into this theme fairly well. As an explosives expert, Junkrat's grenade launcher is totally fitting as a primary fire, launching grenades that bounce a few times before exploding, or they explode on contact with an enemy or an enemy barrier. These grenades are fairly large in terms of projectile size, but they're also pretty slow even by damaging projectile standards, and it used to be even slower. Also fitting for explosions, his primary fire does have a little bit of knockback, but not nearly as much as his ability Concussive Mine. Concussive Mine, which I will be referring to as Conk throughout the rest of the video, is a controlled explosive where you throw out a little mine that you can then choose to explode with your secondary fire unless it gets destroyed by the enemy. As indicated by the name, Conk has extremely high knockback, always knocking Junkrat himself and enemies 45 degrees upwards, while also knocking everyone away from the center of the mine itself. It's also worth noting that the cooldown starts the moment he throws it, not the moment it explodes, meaning that you can throw one and save it for a while and get basically 3 charges of his Conk. Now, while his other ability, Steel Trap, also behaves the same when it comes to the cooldown, it's pretty boring in comparison to the rest of his kit. It is ostensibly meant to be used for area control and flanker control, but you basically just throw it on the ground and you hope that someone either steps into it like an idiot or that they shoot it and then you know that they're there. In comparison to the rest of his explosive kit, Steel Trap is just pretty boring. Obviously, it's not useless, as new players won't look for the trap consistently, and while veterans are used to looking for it, the better you are at the game, the less you look at the ground. But it's just pretty boring and not as conducive to the rest of his playstyle as anything else in his kit. The same cannot be said about his ultimate, Riptire, however. As soon as Junkrat pops his ultimate, he gains full control over a tire that moves pretty fast, faster than most characters, and can also climb up and over walls. Junkrat remains in full control of this ultimate until he decides to explode it after the 10-second duration is up, or if the enemy destroys it, then it won't even explode. Its burst damage is high enough to kill even some tanks up close, and it has really good AoE, making it basically a guaranteed kill against a squishy. This guaranteed kill is enhanced by taking the Nitro Boost Miner perk, which gives him an optional temporary speed boost, but it does reduce the damage of the tire by half. His other miner perk is Mine Recycling, which gives him a Conk Mine back on every Concussive Mine final blow. This perk encourages the Direct plus Conk Mine combo that one-shots any character that is less than 225 HP. Because this combo typically happens up close, Junkrat will usually end up flying as well, which means that Bon Voyage, a major perk that increases his attack speed after going flying with his Conk Mine, combos really well with Mine Recycling. That being said, his other major perk, Frag Cannon, enhances his projectile speed, which makes him not just better at dueling, but also makes his one-shot combo even faster. The only other part of his kit that I haven't mentioned yet is his passive Tonal Mayhem, which upon death he will drop 6 bombs that all deal 50 damage in a 2-meter radius. With the sole exception of Steel Trap, everything else in his kit is some sort of explosive that affects not just the enemy, but usually himself as well. For Riptire, he gains full control over it, Conk Mine will knock him away, and his direct hit will also knock himself away just a tiny amount. His kit is wacky and chaotic and inconsistent and relies on AoE damage, so surely he hasn't seen that much professional play, right? Upon the original release of Overwatch, he didn't see that much play as he was outclassed by most other damage heroes, and he also damaged himself with his own abilities. The most notable competition for Junkrat is Pharah, who holds a similar niche with strong AoE damage, the main difference of the two being Pharah has less burst damage, while Junkrat has less mobility. Junkrat did receive quality of life buffs in October of 2016 and March of 2017, but finally received a buff that pushed him into the meta in late August of 2017. This patch would provide him with 2 conch mine charges instead of just 1, and it increased the movement speed of his ult and removed the time limit on climbing, making his ult significantly more consistent, and basically allowed it to guarantee a kill. Junkrat started to see professional play during the Overwatch World Cup of 2017, and that rise would continue into the first stage of the inaugural season of the Overwatch League, where he was the 3rd most played damage hero. In January of 2018, Junkrat would receive his first nerf, this time giving Conch a fall-off radius. This nerf led to the least play he would see in professional play at the time, falling off to the 5th most picked damage hero in Stage 2. As teams adjusted to his fall-off damage just existing in the first place, they realized that he was still extremely oppressive while defending chokes, and so during the 3rd stage, he would end as the 3rd most played DPS hero once again. Following Brink's introduction and the nerf of dive heroes, Junkrat ended the 4th stage as the 2nd most played DPS, only behind Widowmaker. Again, due to his overperformance, especially during Stage 4, he received another nerf in May of 2018, this time decreasing his primary fire projectile size from 0.3 to 0.2 meters, and reducing the speed of Riptire from 13 to 12 meters per second. Because of his nerfs and changes to Hanzo, the playoff meta was a double sniper meta, with the original GOATS composition seeing playtime on brawl maps. Due to this change in the meta, Junk ended up as the 6th most played DPS and the least amount of play he had seen all year. Despite the fact that Junkrat has good AoE damage and can break barriers fast, Junkrat really didn't like the rise of GOATS. As D.Va's defense matrix nullifies his damage, Zarya turns his spam into her damage, and Moira gets to heal up all of his spam for fast ultimates. Additionally, Pharah just playing well out of reach for the GOATS composition meant that she was just much better into GOATS than Junkrat was. So while Junkrat saw very little play while GOATS was meta, he did see a little bit more play in specifically Stage 2 of 2019 of the Overwatch League, because he received a buff to his primary fire impact damage, raising it from 120 to 130. Junkrat was among one of the many DPS heroes that was buffed during the GOATS era that didn't affect the comp being played at higher tiers of play, but just made comp and ranked a lot less fun to play for the average player. In April of 2019, Junkrat saw another round of changes, this time increasing his projectile speed while reducing the bounces until it explodes, but he saw even less play in Stage 3 of the Overwatch League compared to Stage 2. Once GOATS was forced out of the meta, Junkrat saw even less play due to the rise of snipers, given that he just doesn't have the range to compete with them, and so he fell to being the 6th least played DPS hero in Stage 4. Following Sigma's introduction, Junkrat just failed to get past or break barriers fast enough in professional play, and so he'd continue to fall in pro presence. While he would occasionally see use, he was never really meta again, as he only saw 1.9% usage throughout all of 2019, down to 1.2% in 2020, even further down to 0.3% in 2021, and even further to 0.1% in 2022, with no data following 2022, but anecdotally, as a watcher of OWCS and 2023 OWL, there was very little playtime of Junkrat at these times. Jumping back to 2020, this time focusing on ranked, Junkrat was definitely too strong following the nerfs to barrier heroes, and he saw a nerf in August of 2020 reducing his primary fire direct damage from 130 to 120, and this would be his last change until the Overwatch 2 beta in 2022. Going into 5v5 and wanting to reduce CC heavily, Junkrat's trap was reworked to no longer root and instead slowed the target until they walked far enough away, while still disabling movement abilities. However, this change to Steel Trap would end up reverted in the 2nd beta and then nerfed after the full release of Overwatch 2 in November of 2022. Due to the lack of a tank and still people adapting to how Overwatch 2 was supposed to be played, Junkrat was overperforming, and so his conch mine damage was reduced from 120 down to 100 in February of 2023, before partially reverting it back up to 110 damage in May of 2023. Following his initial nerf in February, he went from one of the better DPS in the game to being one of the worst until February 2024, when he had his projectile size reduced during the Season 9 changes. At this point, he went from being one of the worst DPS in the game to being just clearly one of the worst DPS in the game, and a little over a week later, he would have his conch mine buffed heavily, decreasing its cooldown and massively increasing its damage by raising its max by 10 and its minimum by 35. May of 2024 would see Junkrat buffed again, this time increasing his direct impact damage by 5 to allow him to 2-shot 250 HP heroes if he lands 2 directs in a row. Even despite the buffs he was given, he definitely wasn't rated highly in terms of being a strong DPS at the time, but it's not like he was that weak either. August 2024 would see more changes to the feel of his primary fire, changing how it bounces to be more similar to Overwatch 1, but they made it so that way after the second bounce, the size of the projectile would be reduced, thus lessening how frequently he gets these direct hits that really aren't that direct. Following this change, he actually started to overperform mainly at lower ranks, and so he ended up having his Conk Mine cooldown increase in November. With the introduction of perks, his viability has increased somewhat, especially following the December 2025 change to increase his projectile base speed, but he isn't considered strong by most players, despite holding a consistently strong win rate since this change. Personally, I actually think Junkrat is underrated currently. He won't see pro play, but in the hands of a good one-trick, he is definitely one of the stronger DPS heroes currently. His only real weakness is struggling into D.Va and Sigma, who are both good tanks right now, but his one-tricks can deal with them decently, or, especially in higher ranks, just go to one-shot the backline. He has seen scattered use here and there in pro play, but usually it's in silly matches where the best team is playing against the worst team, and they just start playing for a little bit of fun. Speaking of fun, Junkrat brings a very different type of fun into the game given his wildly unique playstyle. His focus on large explosions and disruption is a niche only also held by Pharah, and Pharah leans more into mobility while Junkrat leads into burst damage. Junkrat also just has combos that Pharah doesn't have, with direct plus conk, or conk fly into direct into conk again, or conk into a trap into a direct. Junkrat has combos that Pharah just doesn't have access to. Additionally, Junkrat also has a kit that is good at disrupting death balls with strong AoE damage. His conk forces people out of position, and his direct damage is just really high, which is good into death balls because death balls are just kind of a degenerate composition that forsake angles for just running down the enemy and forcing the objective with healing and mitigation. To top it all off, his theme is built around explosives and doing crazy things with them, and his kit executes on that theme super well. The downside of being so focused on explosives without having any mobility is it means that his entire kit revolves around executing on burst damage and spam, and that just really doesn't feel great to get hit by. No matter how slow moving his projectiles are, the explosions have a pretty large radius, so it means that you're going to take some damage from him, regardless of if he's aiming at you or not. For lower ranks, this means getting hit by spam that he just throws into chokes and hallways, and players at lower skill levels just don't know how to deal with it. Whereas at higher ranks, there's really no time to react to his playstyle, given that he basically plays like a flying assassin similar to Pharah, but he has an even lower time to kill than she does. Even if you know there's a Junkrat on the enemy team and you're actively looking for him, you barely have enough time to react to him if you're a 225 HP character. And I'm sure you're not going to be surprised to hear that I really don't think Steel Trap adds anything to his kit. It isn't used for mobility, it doesn't add anything to his playstyle or theme, you just throw it out, and it's boring and annoying. It's also kind of clear that the dev team doesn't know what to do with it, given that in Stadium there's really not much that changes how it actually works. The largest changes to Steel Trap is adding a bunch of mini Steel Traps that also slow. There's not much else to it, and this is definitely a minor grievance, but everything else in his kit outside of Steel Trap has knockback. I understand that explosions having some sort of knockback does provide some sort of impact outside of just the high burst damage, but I don't know how necessary it is given that 3 out of his 4 abilities slash primary fire has some sort of knockback. So if I was in control of Junkrat and I had my full creative vision to do whatever I wanted with him, how exactly would I change him? Well, I would slightly reduce his burst damage, focusing on Conk Mine to make it more of a mobility cooldown. While I do think his current direct damage is probably a little too high, and I would personally reduce it by 5 damage, I don't know how necessary that truly is, depending on how low we go with the Conk Mine damage. One other thing is I think Conk Mine shouldn't send enemies as far up as it currently does. I don't want to mess with Junk one-trick's aim too much, but I do think it sends just a little too high. Now, of course, the main change I would want to make is replacing Steel Trap. I think I've made it pretty clear that I believe Steel Trap is a bad ability, but the concepts behind it are not bad. What I mean by that is, I think what Steel Trap is meant to provide for Junkrat is good to keep in mind when replacing it. So, what exactly does Skill Trap currently provide? Well, it is supposed to provide some sort of area denial / flanker control, and I think that it is chaotic, so whatever the placement is should play into the explosive theme, or at least be something a little out there. So starting off with the first replacement idea I could think of, we have a Molotov cocktail. Well yes, I do think there is some overlap with Ash's Dynamite and Torgurn's Molten Core. I think it can be made different enough by having some of the explosion damage that Dynamite has, but not nearly as much, while having the same sort of persistence that Molten Core does, but obviously not as much over time damage. This would also give Junkrat a little bit more versatility in that he can throw it in an area where someone is trying to run through, where death balls are trying to run through, or he can use it in his combo given that Cogbind would have less damage. This also gives Junkrat some more obvious synergy with Melga and Onron by actually setting enemies on fire, and it plays into Pyromania. Yes, I know he's not a full-on Pyromaniac, but an obsession with explosives does fall under the category of Pyromania, so technically it works. Another thing he could have is some sort of slowing minefield, similar to Ziggsy from League. Don't just imagine a Hammond minefield where you get exploded by one and you're probably booped into another. This wouldn't have any sort of knockback, it would just slow you, and the more you run into, the more damage you end up taking. Now, the main thing I would like to add is that the abilities I've stated so far, while they would be used within the burst combo that he has in a direct plus concussive plus new ability, or direct plus new ability plus concussive, it doesn't actually make his burst stronger. If anything, having more animations to go through technically makes it worse, giving enemies more time to react, while still giving the combo potential in the hands of the Junkrat. Now, there is another way of dealing with flankers, and that's just called running away from them. So of course, he could have some sort of mobility cooldown as well. This would also assist him in his main problem matchup, which is dealing with ranged characters. As for how, I'm sure that there's some sort of chaotic Mad Maxi thing they could do, but the first thing that I thought of was riding his tire or some other sort of explosive a short distance, providing a burst of mobility that, if he runs into an enemy while doing so, it can explode, dealing some damage. Maybe he'd have to charge up his Riptire like a Beyblade before riding on it. I don't know, there's something chaotic he can do with it, but this would give him some sort of burst mobility that plays into his combo potential, while also alleviating some of his weaknesses, while also lessening some of the burst damage he has. Again, Junkrat is supposed to lean more into burst damage than mobility compared to Pharah. However, giving him some sort of mobility means that he can have his burst damage reduced, and hopefully that will help improve his consistency if he has some sort of mobility to help him deal with flankers, while also helping him in the range matchup. That being said, I know my ideas aren't perfect, so I'm more than willing to listen to your guys' suggestions. After all, it's clear to me that Junkrat's design and aesthetic is very popular, as he holds a more than 10% pick rate in quick play regardless of the season, and his OTPs love the mayhem he can cause. I believe that his strength comes from his numbers being tuned too high rather than his kit naturally being a great fit for Overwatch, and his competitive history in turn supports this. As the game has been further optimized, he's fallen further and further out of the pro level. In exchange, his one-tricks are given just enough damage to terrorize the ladder with spam at lower skill levels, while being a better flying assassin than Pharah and Echo at the higher skill levels. Again, I understand that my changes are unlikely to fix all of the issues his kit has, and that there's a chance that it would make it less popular than before, but I hope that the goals that I have laid out for my changes encourage you all to think about how you would change his kit if you had the chance. Regardless, I hope you all enjoyed listening to Junkrat's competitive history and some potential rework ideas, and if you did, if you wouldn't mind subscribing, I'd greatly appreciate it. If you don't agree with my changes, well, hell, even if you do, let me know what changes you'd give him, if any, in the comments below, and I still hope you enjoyed learning a tiny bit about the game design, and I'll see you all in the next one.